When did your silence condemn others, but truth condemn you? Alright, here's the thing. I'm staring at a screen that's flashing a single, impossible question. Do I tell the truth and watch everything I've worked for crumble, or do I lie, knowing full well it will be someone else's ruin? My gut is a tangled knot of fear and a strange, almost defiant anger. I always thought it'd be the type to just shut up and take it, the recovering doormat that I am, but this time, the stakes feel different, higher than just my own comfort. This isn't just about me getting walked all over, it's about a lot of people losing a lot of things. And it all kicked off with a dream, a music festival, and a guy named Brian Gallagher who apparently thinks he's bulletproof. It started innocently enough, or as innocently as anything can start when Brian Gallagher, 56M, is involved. Brian was the visionary, the self-proclaimed genius behind Harmonic Haven, a multi-day music festival that was supposed to put our little town on the map. He'd hired me, Susan Lopez, 34F, as his head of operations about 6 months ago. My job was ostensibly to manage logistics, coordinate vendors, handle artist relations basically. Everything that Brian found too tedious or, let's be honest, too grounded in reality to bother with. My friends Melissa Bailey, 28F, and Albert Henderson, 75M, had warned me about him. Melissa, ever the pragmatist, had just raised an eyebrow and said, "Susan, honey, you sure you're ready to wrangle a creative type with a penchant for grandiosity and zero attention span?" Albert, on the other hand, the competitive friend he is, had clapped me on the back and declared, "Good for you, Susie. Go get him. Just don't let him outthink you. Always be 2 steps ahead, even if he doesn't know it." Even my nosy neighbor, Billy Ryan, 74M, who usually just commented on my recycling habits, had offered a cryptic, "That Gallagher fellow, he's got a big mouth and even bigger ideas. Be careful, girl." I should have listened more closely to all of them. I thought I was being careful. My whole life, it'd been the one to avoid conflict, to smooth things over, to pick up the pieces others left behind. That's what recovering doormat meant, right? Not just letting people walk all over you, but also being the one who instinctively cleaned up their mess without being asked. Brian, with his booming laugh and even louder pronouncements of revolutionary concepts and unprecedented experiences, was a master messmaker. He'd announce a new stage design, a surprise headliner, or a radical ticketing strategy, often without consulting me, the budget, or the laws of physics. My days were a chaotic dance of damage control, trying to wrangle his latest whim into something remotely feasible. The festival itself was a massive undertaking. Wed secured a sprawling piece of land just outside town, mostly open fields, perfect for camping, stages, and the kind of vibrant chaos Brian envisioned. The weather, as always, was the biggest wild card in a rural setting, but Wed booked a clear weekend in late spring, hoping for the best. Brian had promised the investors, a consortium of local businesses and a few venture capitalists he'd sweet-talked, that Harmonic Haven would be an annual institution, a cultural landmark. His pitches were legendary. He could sell ice to an Eskimo, a phrase I often heard, usually right before I had to figure out where we were going to store the ice. Melissa, bless her heart, had been my rock. She was our social media manager, a job Brian mostly ignored but which Melissa took seriously, building a buzzing online community around the festival. We'd share knowing glances over Brian's increasingly outlandish demands, or exchange frantic texts when he'd unilaterally decide to move a VIP tent to the middle of a muddy field. "Just breathe," she'd text me, often adding a gif of a calm puppy. Melissa was the kind of friend who'd show up with coffee and a freshly baked scone when I was pulling all-nighters, then quietly take over answering emails so I could actually eat it. She got it. She saw the cracks in the facade too, but her job was to project sunshine and good vibes, so she plastered on her professional smile and kept the Instagram feed looking like a utopian paradise. Albert, in his own way, was supportive too, though his support often came wrapped in thinly veiled competition. He ran a small but incredibly successful local brewery, and he'd secured a prime spot as a vendor, planning to launch a special Harmonic Haze IPA for the festival. "You need to make sure my tent is right by the main stage, Susie," he'd say. "Can't have those youngsters walking too far for a proper brew. And don't let Brian try to put some artisanal kombucha next to me. People want real beer, not fermented tea water." It was a character, loud and boisterous, always trying to one-up everyone, even me, his friend. He'd ask about ticket sales, then casually mention how his latest batch of beer was selling faster than concert tickets. But beneath the bluster, I knew he genuinely wanted the festival to succeed, not just for his own profits, but because he saw it as a boost for the whole community. He'd even offered me some surprisingly astute business advice over the years, usually prefaced with, "Now, if *** were running things, I'd." Billy Ryan, the nosy neighbor, was a different kind of presence. He lived 2 doors down from me, a retired history teacher with an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone's comings and goings. If I left for work at 7:03 instead of 7:00, he'd comment on it. If I had a new plant on my porch, he'd ask where I got it. It was irritating, but also strangely comforting in its predictability. He'd often be out watering his prize-winning roses when I got home, and he'd always have a question about the festival. "Heard you're expecting 50,000 people, Susan. Where are they all going to park? Or, is it true they're bringing in those noisy electronic acts? Hope they don't disturb the peace." His questions were usually wrapped in a tone of mild disapproval, but I started to notice a flicker of genuine curiosity, even pride, in his eyes when I talked about the positive economic impact or the local artists we were featuring. He even brought over a pie once, a surprising gesture, saying, "Heard you've been working late. Thought you might need something proper to eat instead of those takeout containers." It was a small moment, but it made me wonder if there was more to Billy than just his nosy exterior. As the festival date loomed, the pressure mounted. We were talking 40,000 people over 3 days. Food vendors, medical stations, security, stages, sound systems, portable toilets, water lines. It was a logistical nightmare that was slowly, painstakingly coming together. Brian, meanwhile, was mostly focused on the vision. I'd walk around the site, arms wide, proclaiming, "This is it, Susan, the dream." I'd nod and smile, then go back to my clipboard, ticking off the 87 unresolved issues that still needed addressing. The first hint of the real trouble came in an offhand comment from Brian, about a week before gates were scheduled to open. We were walking the main field, checking on the progress of the main stage construction. "You know, Susan," he'd said, squinting up at the scaffolding, "we're a little lean on the reserves, but it's fine. The ticket sales will cover it. We'll be swimming in profit by Sunday night." "Lean on the reserves?" I'd asked, stopping short. "Brian, what does that mean? We have a contingency budget for emergencies, right? For bad weather or a last-minute artist cancellation?" He just waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that. Well, let's just say I reallocated a few things, to maximize the experience. Better sound system, more exotic lighting for the rave tent. Essential upgrades, Susan. Trust the vision." My stomach had dropped. I had copies of the budget, and while I wasn't directly responsible for the finance side, that was Brian and his hand-picked CFO, a perpetually stressed man named Roger who seemed to exist solely to nod at Brian's pronouncements. I knew the numbers. We were supposed to have a healthy buffer, a significant chunk of money set aside for the inevitable hiccups of an event this size. Reallocated was Brian speak for spent on something frivolous. I tried to push it. "Brian, the investors are expecting a certain level of fiscal responsibility. Roger sent over the quarterly report last week, and it looked like we were still on track." He'd laughed, a booming sound that reverberated off the metal scaffolding. "Roger worries too much. He's a numbers man, not a visionary. We need to spend money to make money, Susan. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. Let's make sure the porta potties are clean." He'd clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that always felt condescending, and walked off to admire a newly installed LED screen. I hadn't worried my pretty little head. It'd worried my entire being. I pulled up the latest financial reports Roger had sent, cross-referencing them with the original budget projections. What Brian had called lean was actually a gaping hole. Our emergency fund was virtually non-existent. Significant chunk of the operating capital had been funneled into things like a ridiculously expensive laser show and a last-minute edition of a hot air balloon ride that hadn't even been approved by the planning committee. Brian hadn't just reallocated, he'd almost entirely depleted our safety net. My hands had shaken as I scrolled through the line items, seeing thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of dollars vanish into vanity projects. I called Melissa. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "can you meet me for coffee? Like right now?" She knew from my tone that it wasn't about a new social media campaign. We met at our usual spot, a quiet cafe where the barista knew our orders by heart. I laid it all out for her, the financial spreadsheet open on my laptop between us. She went from casual sips of her latte to staring at the screen, her eyes widening. "Holy cow, Susan," she whispered. "He actually spent all asterisk of it, on asterisk hot air balloons and lasers. Don't forget the lasers," I said, running a hand through my hair. "And some custom-designed chill-out pods that look like giant inflatable mushrooms, which by the way have already sprung a leak." "So what does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "If something goes wrong, like a major thunderstorm, or if ticket sales aren't as strong as projected, means we're screwed," I said, closing the laptop with a definitive snap. "It means if we have even one significant unbudgeted expense, or if the projected attendance doesn't hit Brian's wildly optimistic numbers, we're out of money, potentially bankrupt. He's put everything on the line and then some just for his vision." Melissa slumped back in her chair. "But how? The investors, don't they have oversight? Brian's a master at charming them. And he's good at obscuring the details, making it sound like necessary operational costs. Plus, Roger is so terrified of him, he signs off on anything Brian tells him to. It's a mess, Melissa, a complete and utter mess." I knew I should have confronted Brian more forcefully. My old instincts, the recovering doormat part of me, had whispered, "Don't rock the boat. He's the boss. He knows what he's doing. Just manage the fallout." But the new me, the one trying desperately to stand her ground, was screaming. This wasn't just about my job, it was about the livelihoods of hundreds of people, the vendors, the local staff, the security teams, the artists. It was about the reputation of the town. The festival opened on a Friday under a sky that was deceptively blue. Brian was everywhere, a whirlwind of back-patting and self-congratulation. "Can you believe it, Susan?" He boomed, grabbing my arm as I rushed past, clipboard in hand. "My vision, a reality? It's going well, Brian," I managed, trying to pull away. "But we have a problem with the food truck power grid in Sector C. They keep tripping the breakers." "Minor details, Susan. Focus on the bigger picture," he bellowed, before turning to shake hands with a local politician. The first day was a blur of frantic problem-solving. Main stage amplifier blew, requiring a costly last-minute rental from a company 3 towns over. A section of portable toilets backed up due to a drainage issue. And true to form, one of the giant inflatable mushrooms had fully deflated, resembling a sad, wrinkled pancake, much to the amusement of some teenagers who decided to use it as an impromptu slip-and-slide. Each incident chipped away at our already thin reserves. I could almost hear the money draining away. Saturday morning, the cracks in Brian's vision were becoming fissures. The initial crowd numbers were good, but not the astronomical figures Brian had been predicting. The weather reports were starting to look ominous for Sunday. And then the texts started coming in. First from Roger, terse and panicked. "Susan, we have a major issue. Payment processing for all ticket sales from yesterday and this morning has failed. Server crash. We have thousands of unprocessed transactions. Money isn't coming through." My heart jumped into my throat. "What do you mean failed?" I typed back, my fingers trembling. "Just what I said, the entire system. Brian insisted on using this new, untested third-party processor he found online because it was cheaper and more innovative. It just crashed. We have no record of actual payments for most of the attendees inside. It's a black hole, Susan. We can't verify anything. I read the message again, then again, as if the words would change. They didn't. Thousands of people had walked in, scanned a ticket, but the money hadn't landed in our accounts. It was like giving away free entry to half the festival. Are you telling me we just let in tens of thousands of people for free? I called Roger, my voice shaking. I don't know, Susan. I'm trying to fix it. Brian's on the phone with the processor's tech support, but they're in a different time zone, and they're not answering. He's furious. Roger sounded like he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I disconnected and paced, trying to think. This wasn't just a lean budget anymore. This was a catastrophic financial hemorrhage. We were supposed to be bringing in hundreds of thousands, if not millions, from ticket sales this weekend, and a massive portion of that simply wasn't there. I found Brian in his command center, a glorified trailer with a too-large desk and a whiteboard covered in incomprehensible diagrams. He was indeed furious, pacing like a caged tiger, shouting into his phone. What do you mean you can't guarantee a fix by end of day? This is Harmonic Haven. This is millions of dollars. You're ruining my vision. He slammed the phone down. His eyes, usually gleaming with manic energy, were wild. Incompetent fools, every last one of them. How could they let this happen? Brian, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though inside I was screaming. Roger says we have almost no funds coming in from ticket sales for the last day and a half. The processing system is down. What's our contingency for something like this? He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Contingency? He scoffed, then his voice dropped, a desperate whisper. There isn't one, Susan. There's no more money. I fronted some of the investment capital for the hot air balloons and the lasers. I promised them bigger returns. He gestured vaguely at the trailer's ceiling. I borrowed against our projected profits. If this money doesn't come through, we're not just broke. We're in massive debt. We'll never pay back the investors. We'll never pay the vendors. We'll be ruined. The magnitude of his impulsiveness, of his sheer recklessness, hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't just been irresponsible, he'd been fraudulent. He'd gambled everyone on his vision, and now it was crashing down. Brian, I said, my voice barely a whisper, are you telling me we might not be able to pay the artists, the security staff, the hundreds of temporary workers? He turned away, shaking his head. I don't know, Susan. I don't know what to tell anyone. This is impossible. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Melissa. Hey, Brian just emailed me. He needs me to put out a press release about a minor technical glitch that's causing temporary payment delays. He wants me to make it sound like it's a minor hiccup and that all payments will be processed by Monday. Is that true? Her voice was laced with concern, the kind that knew the answer even before I gave it. I looked at Brian, hunched over his desk, head in his hands. He was a broken man, but his desperation was also a trap. He wanted Melissa to lie. Spin a story that would buy him time he might not have, time that could plunge us all deeper into a hole. And this is where I am, standing here with Brian's desperation hanging in the air like the humidity before a storm. My phone is still vibrating in my hand, Melissa waiting for my confirmation, for me to tell her what to say, what lie to tell. Do I tell her to put out the lie, to protect Brian and maybe, just maybe, buy us a miracle? Do I tell her the truth, that Brian's impulsive decisions have tanked the entire festival, that thousands of people might not get paid, and that our vision is about to collapse into a very messy, very public financial crisis? My stomach churns, a cold dread seeping into my bones. This isn't just about recovering from being a doormat anymore. This is about choosing between what's right and what might save us, temporarily, from utter ruin. And I have no idea which one is which. My phone buzzed again in my hand, Melissa's name a burning ember on the screen. Brian's slumped figure in the chair, the heavy silence of the trailer, the weight of the lie he wanted me to tell, it all pressed in on me, suffocating. My breath hitched. This was it. The moment I either reverted to the old Susan, the one who smoothed things over, or finally stood her ground, even if it meant blowing up everything. Recovering doormat had spent her life trying to avoid this kind of confrontation, but the alternative, the thought of perpetuating Brian's fraud, making Melissa an unwitting accomplice, making * myself an accomplice, was a far uglier prospect than any public collapse. I took a deep, shaky breath, the kind I usually reserve for climbing stairs after a long day. Melissa, I typed back, my fingers still trembling, don't send anything. Not yet. Call me. Now. My phone rang instantly. I took a step away from Brian, whose head was still in his hands. Hey, Melissa's voice was tight with anticipation. What's going on? Is it that bad? It's worse, I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. Brian didn't just reallocate funds. He depleted the emergency reserves entirely. Used them to front some of his own investments in the festival, betting on ticket sales to cover it. The payment processing system failing? It's not a glitch, Melissa. It's catastrophic. Thousands of people got in for free and he doesn't have the money to pay anyone. Not the artists, not the vendors, not the staff. There was a stunned silence on the other end. I could practically hear Melissa's brain processing the enormity of it. Susan, she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper, Ure saying, we're bankrupt, like right now, potentially, massively in debt. He's completely wiped us out. He wants you to lie to say it's a minor delay to buy him time. Another silence, heavier this time. And you're not going to let me do that, are you? She asked, her voice gaining a surprising firmness. No, I said, the word coming out stronger than I expected. No, I am not. This isn't a glitch, Melissa. This is a deliberate, reckless gamble that backfired spectacularly. People are going to lose their livelihoods because of Brian's ego. I can't be a part of covering that up. We have to tell the truth, or at least I have to. Okay, Melissa said, a new resolve in her voice. Okay, what do? We need to bring Roger into this properly. He's been Brian's terrified puppet, but he knows the numbers. And then we figure out how to mitigate the damage. We shut down the festival tonight. Tonight, Melissa gasped. But it's only Saturday afternoon. We can't let more people in without collecting payments. We can't let the debt get any deeper. We need to tell the investors, the staff, the public. It's going to be a nightmare, Mel, but it's the only way to minimize the fallout. Get Roger. Meet me at the main operations tent in 15 minutes. Don't tell Brian yet. I'll deal with him. I hung up, my hand still shaking. I looked at Brian again. He still hadn't moved. The anger, the cold dread was still there, but something else had settled in its place, a grim determination. I walked over to his desk. Brian, I said, my voice cutting through his despair. He flinched, looking up. His eyes were bloodshot, bewildered. I'm not putting out that lie. Melissa's not putting out that lie. We're going to tell the truth. His head snapped up, a flicker of his old fire in his eyes. You can't. Y'all ruin everything. My vision, my reputation. Your vision just cost hundreds of people their paychecks and the investors their money, I retorted, my voice surprisingly steady. Your reputation is already ruined. The longer we hide this, the worse it gets. We're shutting the festival down tonight. I need to notify everyone, starting with security and the artists. And we need to prepare a statement that tells the truth, or as much of it as we can without incriminating ourselves into jail. He stood up, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. You can't. I am the CEO. I forbid it. You can forbid all you want, Brian, I said, looking him dead in the eye, the doormat completely gone. But someone has to act responsibly, and clearly it's not going to be you. I'm going to the operations tent. If you want to join us and try to salvage some shred of dignity, fine. If not, you can sit here and watch it burn. I turned and walked out of the trailer, leaving Brian sputtering behind me. My legs felt like jelly, but my resolve was solid. This was going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done. Melissa and Roger were already at the operations tent, a hub of activity that had suddenly gone eerily quiet as my message spread. Roger looked even more stressed than usual, his brow furrowed, his eyes darting nervously. Susan, he whispered, I've been trying to make the processing system work. It's dead, truly dead. And the last report? The contingency fund isn't just lean, it's been zeroed out for weeks. I flagged it to Brian, he just told me not to worry, that the sales would be astronomical. I know, Roger, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but I saw the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. He hadn't been complicit in Brian's recklessness, just terrified. We're shutting down the festival tonight, immediately after the last main stage act. We need to get a plan in place to inform everyone and to secure the site. Melissa, ever practical, was already pulling up templates for public announcements. We need to phrase this carefully, Susan. Unforeseen financial irregularities, rather than Brian Gallagher blew all our money on hot air balloons and lasers. We worked through the afternoon, a frantic, desperate attempt to manage an unmanageable crisis. Brian eventually showed up, a ghost of his former boisterous self, mostly silent, occasionally interjecting with an unhelpful suggestion before retreating into himself again. I kept him involved, though, partly to prevent him from doing something even more catastrophic, and partly because I knew he needed to witness the wreckage he had wrought. The news broke quietly at first, through our hushed conversations with the security team, then the stage managers, then the artists' liaisons. Panic started to ripple through the festival grounds. Vendors, hearing whispers, began approaching us, their faces etched with worry. I had to personally tell Albert, who marched up to the tent, a scowl on his face. What in the blazes is going on, Susie? He boomed, a half-empty mug of his Harmonic Haze IPA in his hand. My tent staff just told me the festival's closing early. What's this nonsense about financial irregularities? Brian's pulled a fast one, hasn't he? I knew it. I knew that man was a snake. Is my money safe? Are you telling me I'm not getting paid for my beer? I looked at Albert, his face red with anger, his competitive bluster temporarily replaced by genuine fear for his business. Albert, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos around us, it's bad. The payment processing system failed. Brian, he spent the emergency funds months ago. We won't be able to pay the vendors in full, not right away. We're going to be in massive debt. His jaw dropped, the competitive friend replaced by a stunned, deeply worried businessman. It looked genuinely small for a moment. Debt? What do you mean debt? My entire weekend's worth of stock? The special brew? I told you to keep an eye on him, Susie. Why didn't you do something? I tried, Albert, I said, my voice cracking slightly. He's a master manipulator. And I underestimated his recklessness. I'm taking steps now to deal with it, to shut it down responsibly. But yes, your money and everyone else's is at risk. We're going to do everything we can to salvage what's left, but it's going to be a long road. He stared at me, then at Brian, who was staring blankly at the wall. Albert let out a frustrated growl. This is a disaster, Susie. A bloody disaster. He turned and stalked off, presumably to start securing his inventory. The disappointment in his eyes, more than the anger, was what stung. Lissa posted the carefully worded, yet still devastating, announcement to the festival's online channels just as the last band finished their set on the main stage. The immediate reaction was a mixture of confusion, anger, and sorrow. We advised all attendees to leave the site safely and calmly. News vans were already converging on the outer perimeter. The dream of Harmonic Haven was collapsing into a very public, very painful reality. 2 weeks later, the festival grounds, once bustling with life and music, were a desolate expanse of broken promises and half-dismantled stages. The media had a field day. Brian Gallagher had vanished, leaving Roger and me to face the fallout. The investors were furious, threatening lawsuits. The vendors were demanding payment. The local community was reeling. He'd spent every waking hour in meetings with lawyers, liquidators, and a very disheartened Roger, trying to untangle the financial mess Brian had left behind. My home, usually a sanctuary, felt like a war zone. The phone rang constantly with reporters or angry creditors. One afternoon, as I was trying to sift through a pile of unpaid invoices, there was a knock at the door. I braced myself, expecting another journalist. It was Billy Ryan, my nosy neighbor. Stood on my porch holding a Tupperware container. He looked different, his usual inquisitive expression replaced by something softer, more concerned. Heard you haven't been out much, Susan, he said, his voice unusually gentle. Brought you some of my wife's meatloaf. She says you look like you've lost 10 pounds just from worry. I blinked, surprised by his kindness. Thanks, Billy, I said, accepting the container. It's been a lot. He nodded, his gaze sweeping over my tired face. I told you that Gallagher fellow had big ideas and a bigger mouth. Always wanted to spend money before he had it. Reminds me of my brother-in-law, Lord rest his soul. Always chasing the next big thing, never thinking about who'd pick up the pieces. He paused, then continued, I was worried about all that noise and those youngsters out there at the festival, but I also saw what it meant for the town. Folks were excited. Small businesses were looking forward to the boost. It's a shame, Susan. Real shame. He didn't ask for details about the finances or who was to blame. He just offered quiet understanding. You did good, though, he added, surprising me again, shutting it down when you did. Could have been a lot worse, I reckon. Took a lot of guts. Not many folks would do that. It just felt like the right thing to do, I mumbled, feeling a blush creep up my neck. Sometimes the right thing is the hardest thing, Billy said, a small, knowing smile on his face. Y'all figure it out, Susan. You're way tougher than you think. He gave a small nod and turned to go, leaving me standing there, container of meatloaf in my hand. My perception of my nosy neighbor irrevocably shifted. He wasn't just a busybody. He was an observer of human nature, and he saw things I never expected him to. His unexpected support, so unlike Albert's initial anger or Melissa's practical crisis management, was a balm to my frayed nerves. A month had passed since the Harmonic Haven implosion. The creditors' meetings were a blur of legal jargon and grim faces. We managed to salvage some of the assets, the staging equipment, some of the sound systems, though the hot air balloons and deflated mushroom pods were unsellable. Brian had been found, holed up in a cheap motel, and was now facing a criminal investigation for fraud. Roger, after giving a full statement to the authorities, resigned, his nerves completely shot. Was effectively the last one standing, the reluctant cleanup crew for Brian's mess. My job was gone, of course, but I felt a strange sense of liberation. The doormat was officially retired. I was now spending my days working with the appointed liquidators, trying to recover anything we could. My phone rang. It was Albert. My stomach tightened. I hadn't spoken to him since that day at the festival. I assumed he was calling to demand his money. Susie, he said, his voice surprisingly subdued. Busy? Always, Albert, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. Look, he said, I know I was a bit rough on you that day. I was just shocked and angry. Lost a good chunk of change on that festival, Had to write off a whole batch of Harmonic Haze, but I've been thinking about what you said, about what you did. I waited, bracing myself. That was a gutsy move, Susie, he continued, his voice laced with a grudging respect I'd never heard from him before. Shutting it down like that. Most people, they'd have just tried to bluff their way through, keep the party going until the whole thing imploded. You saved us a lot more money by pulling the plug when you did. And you took the heat, didn't you? You didn't run off like Brian. I was speechless. Albert Henderson, admitting it'd done something right, something he asterisk wouldn't have thought of. I knew it was the right thing to do, Albert, I finally managed. Right thing, he scoffed, but there was no malice in it. Sometimes the right thing costs you, but it also shows you who's got backbone. Look, I'm calling because I've been talking to a few of the other vendors, the ones who didn't get paid. We're setting up a small ad hoc committee. We want to see if there's a way to try and recoup some of our losses, maybe put a collective claim against Brian. And we're thinking we needed someone who actually understood how that man operated, someone who knows the numbers, and frankly, someone who's not afraid to call a spade a spade. We were wondering if you'd be willing to advise us. On a pro bono basis, of course, for now. We don't have much to offer up front. My jaw nearly hit the floor. Albert, the competitive friend, was asking for my help, acknowledging my expertise, and admitting he needed me. This was unprecedented. Albert, I said slowly, are you seriously asking me to help you sue Brian Gallagher? Well, you know more about his shady dealings than anyone, don't you? He said, a touch of his old bluster returning, but this time it felt different, like a shared mission. And you've got a good head on your shoulders, Susie. Despite that doormat thing you always talk about. You clearly know how to stand up for yourself now. So what do you say? You in? My heart swelled, a warmth spreading through me that wasn't just relief, but a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just about cleaning up a mess. It was about reclaiming some control, about fighting for the people who had been hurt. And it was Albert, the very person I always felt I had to be 2 steps ahead of, who was extending the olive branch, inviting me to use my skills not in competition, but in collaboration. I am in, Albert, I said, a genuine smile finally breaking through. Absolutely, I am in. The first meeting of the ad hoc committee was held a week later at Albert's brewery. He'd cleared out a section of the tasting room, and a few key vendors were present, along with a surprisingly sharp pro bono lawyer Albert had somehow unearthed. Albert was surprisingly deferential to me, even introducing me as our lead strategist, a phrase that made me internally chuckle. His competitive nature hadn't entirely vanished, but it had been redirected. He was now competing to be the most effective in getting their money back. I walked them through the financial reports, the areas where Brian had diverted funds, the specifics of the payment processing failure. I explained the legal avenues, the slim chances, but also the moral imperative. It was exhausting, but for the first time in months, I felt truly engaged in work that mattered, work that had a tangible goal beyond simply minimizing damage. After the meeting, as people were filtering out, Albert pulled me aside. You know, he said, his voice low, I was talking to Billy Ryan the other day. He was singing your praises, said you were a force to be reckoned with and a credit to the neighborhood. High praise from old Billy, let me tell you. I laughed, a genuine, joyful sound. Billy? Really? Yeah, Billy. He said something about how you went from a mouse to a lioness. That was his exact phrase. He also said his wife says you should come over for dinner soon for some more meatloaf. I felt a surge of warmth. Billy, with his quiet observation, had seen the change in me, just as Albert, with his gruff exterior, was now openly acknowledging it. I hadn't actively sought their approval, but their unexpected recognition meant the world. I had spent so much of my life trying to be what others wanted, trying to avoid conflict. Facing this disaster head-on, speaking the truth, taking responsibility, had transformed me in ways I never imagined. The financial crisis of Harmonic Haven would not be resolved quickly or cleanly. It would be a long, arduous process, marked by legal battles and slow, painful recovery. There would be no magical influx of cash, no grand rescue. But the immediate panic had subsided, replaced by a steady, determined effort to rebuild and reclaim. Ryan Gallagher's impulsive decisions had shattered a dream, but in the process, they had also forged unexpected alliances and revealed hidden strengths. I was no longer just Susan Lopez, the recovering doormat. I was Susan Lopez, the one who cleaned up the mess, the one who spoke the truth, and the one who was finally, truly, standing on her own 2 feet, ready to face whatever came next. It was a messy, imperfect resolution, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, it felt right.